Namaste and greetings. I, Fiza Mahajan, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, Prabhav, एवं नीति अनुसंधान संस्थान, Nai Delhi, extend my warmest welcome to you all to IMPRI Web Policy Talk. We are gathered today for a panel discussion on defense, foreign policy, and Union Budget 2023-24. This discussion is organized by the Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies as a part of IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of International Affairs, #Diplomacy Dialogue. This discussion is a part of IMPRI's third annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget Financial Year 2023-24 being organized from February 2nd to 7th, 2023. I welcome all of you to this enlightening deliberation and thank you for tuning into this discussion. Our moderator for today's discussion is Dr. Simi Mehta, CEO and Editorial Director, IMPRI. We welcome you, ma'am. The panelists for today's discussion are Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, retired Professor, International Relations, Jadavpur University, Kolkata, Major General Dr. K Chakravorty, VSM retired, strategic thinker on security issues, Professor Swaran Singh, Professor and Chairperson, Center for International Politics, Organization and Disarmament, Jawaharlal Nehru University, and Mr. Robinder and Sachdev, President, the Image India Institute, New Delhi, founder, the Lemonade Party. We welcome all of you. Now, without any further ado, let us start the program. It is my honor to invite Dr. Simi Mehta to start the program. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Fiza, and good evening, and I welcome all of you to the Web Policy discussion on Defense, Foreign Policy and Union Budget 2023-24 as part of the diplomacy dialogues being organized by the IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies. It is a delightful opportunity for me to be hosting this panel discussion. Defense and foreign policy are indispensable part of the Indian economy and India's development, and hence a discussion on what the budgetary allocations for these areas have been made in the budget presented by the Finance Minister, Ms. Nirmala Sitharaman, on 1st February 2023 becomes very important. This is especially because one needs to fathom the implications of these allocations towards the realization of the Amrit Kal in the truest sense of the term. Today's panel discussion will explore how India's geopolitics could be affected, or if India can drive its geopolitics as per its own terms. So without any further ado, let's get started. I would request Samriddhi from our team to just present a brief overview of the budgetary allocations in these sectors. Over to you, Samriddhi.
Good evening. I'm Samriddhi, researcher at IMPRI. Let me present to you the key features of the budget pertaining to defense, foreign policy, and external affairs at this August gathering. The overall allocation for defense is 5.94 lakh crore, up from 5.25 lakh crore in financial year 2022-2023, a hike of 13%. In terms of share, the defense is 13.18% of the overall budget. For the armed forces, the Indian Air Force got the largest share among the three services at rupees 57,000 crore, a 3.6% hike from FY 2022 to 2023. The Indian Army was allocated rupees 37,000 crore, a hike of 15.6% from last year, and the Indian Navy's capital budget was rupees 52,000 crore with an annual increase of 10.6%. With a 43% hike to rupees 5,000 crore in financial year 2023 to 2024, as against rupees 3,500 crore in FY 2022-2023, there is a clear thrust towards infrastructure strengthening in the border areas. The second highlight would be the increase in the non-salary revenue operational allocation, witnessing a rise of 44% from rupees 62,431 crore in budget estimate 2022-23 to rupees 90,000 crore in budget estimate 2023-24. This is reportedly being done to enhance military and security preparedness given the current challenges. The enhanced allocation in the budget will also cater to training aids and stimulators for Agniveers and ensure that they achieve the set standards of training for induction in the defense forces. Exempt EEE status has been allocated to the Agniveer Fund in 2023-24 budget. The research, innovation, and technological development sector of defense have also garnered centrality in the budget, with DRDO allocated rupees 23,264 crore in budget estimate 2023-24, a 9% spike. In the innovation sector, IDEX and DTIS have been allocated rupees 116 crore and rupees 45 crore respectively, representing an enhancement of 93% for IDEX and 95% for DTIS over 2022-23. This will fulfill the Ministry of Defense's vision to leverage ideas from bright young minds across the country. I would also like to highlight the 15.5% increase in the defense pension budget from rupees 1.1 lakh crore in budget estimate 2022-23 to rupees 1.3 lakh crore in budget estimate 2023-24. The government's commitment to transforming healthcare outreach to our veterans defense budget 2023-24 registers a notable increase of 52% in the allotment for ex-servicemen contributory health scheme, ECHS, with budget estimate allocation of rupees 5,431 crore in FY 2023-24 against rupees 3,582 crore in financial year 2022-23. This enhancement will ensure cashless health services and improve service delivery to our veterans and their dependents across India. Summing up, we have seen a rise in budget allocation for the defense sector with a focus on R&D and innovation, a concerted effort towards non-revenue operational allocation, and what seems to be a genuine step towards modernization through greater push towards research and innovation. As India embarks on its journey as the chair for the G20 and Shanghai Cooperation Organization presidency, let us take a look into the budget to the Ministry of External Affairs. With a total of rupees 18,050 crores in the union budget for 2023-24 and an increase of 4.64%, we can note the priority given to the G20 chair. A fund of over 990 crore has been allocated to the same. India is also on its way to organizing the G20 summit in September this year. With the budgetary allocation and engagement being assigned to this chairmanship, we can discern the essence it holds to the Indian foreign policy. Looking further into the MEA budget allocation with respect to India's neighborhood, the Development Assistance Fund has, however, remained largely the same, with some witnessing marginal rise and others cuts. Maldives, owing to the Green Mail Connectivity Project, and Bhutan are a few to retain an increase in allocation, while many, like Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Mauritius, have seen some decline. As per the MEA budget statement, the aid budget has fallen from rupees 5,476 crore to rupees 5,408 crore in 2023-2024. Thank you. We look forward to learning from our esteemed guest and panelists and deliberation. Over to you, Dr. Mehta. Thank you.
Very much, Samriddhi, for putting this wonderful and crisply putting up all these figures for all of us. So let us begin with our panelists and delve straight into the discussion based on perhaps the numbers would be revolving around what you have just presented. I would, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, welcome. Good evening.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you, ma'am. If you could just bring your screen, there is a laptop screen towards the cell. Yeah, we could see it more clearly. Yes, thank you. So, ma'am, if we can begin with you, and if you could give us your sense of how the budget 23-24 implies on the foreign policy, especially with respect to the India's neighborhood first policy, it would be great. And also, as Samriddhi has mentioned, there have been some commitments with a marginal increase towards some countries, while some have seen some decline. So if you could just throw some light on that. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you. In fact, thank you, Dr. Mehta, and also the Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies of IMPRI for inviting me, and greetings to my co-panelists. Now, this basically budget, union budget, is presented around this year every year, and this ensures the efficient allocation of available resources. What is important here is available resources. The operative words are these, because while many ministries may have a to-do list, it's not always possible to do everything that one wishes to because of limited resources. Now, there are some things. The union budget works in tandem with the 5-year plan, for instance. Therefore, it prioritizes certain things over others when it comes to allocation. Also, the government of the present basically has certain missions and visions, okay? And in fact, obviously will prioritize certain things over others. For instance, in fact, the current government, we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat. So basically here you find MSMEs, okay, are being the same. Even in the defense budget, you find MSMEs have been emphasized, okay? So basically there are certain priorities. Now, also, what is important is that the union budget promotes overall macroeconomic growth and inclusive development for all sections of the society and the economy. The key sections have always been health, education, agriculture, infrastructure development, internal security, environment, also poverty alleviations, etc. And so therefore, in fact, these are prioritized in almost every budget. Now, at the same time, India has this goal of becoming a developed economy by 2047, which is the 100th year of independence. And it also wants to become a global power and a global pair, which are, of course, very laudable. And therefore, what you find is the allocations to the Ministry of External Affairs and the Defense Ministry are becoming more and more important. Now, what you must remember, and what, in fact, Dr. Mehta was talking about, well, the economy is very important, and allocation, therefore, is also very important. The economy is the currency that powers international relations, and the GDP is the pivotal numeric of global influence. India must be economically strong within to be influential abroad. It is economic power that allows a nation to build military cooperation, capabilities, and in fact, enhance its influence abroad. In fact, it's India's economic rise which made it possible for its policymakers to envision India as a major pole in the evolving global order. And today, as was pointed out, India holds the presidency for the G20, and the G20 summit will be held here. It also holds the presidency for the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Council organization, and basically holds the chairmanship for the Wassenaar Agreement. So as a result, it is a global leader in its own right. And therefore, what you find, of course, is there is a slight increase in the allocation for the Ministry of External Affairs. But out of the sum that was mentioned, 990 crores is set aside towards the G20. Primarily, in fact, the importance of the G20, because the G20 represents 85% of global GDP. It represents over 75% of worldwide trade. And in fact, it covers over 2/3 of the world's population. So therefore, it is very important in its own right. Now, well, the budget actually, the other thing that was asked of me by Dr. Mehta was, well, why certain allocations have increased and why certain allocations have decreased. Now, primarily, as was mentioned, neighborhood first policy, and this has been promoted, but what one finds is that apart from Bhutan, which of course is India's neighbor, where in fact 41.04% of MEA's development assistance is going in the coming year, and for Maldives, which is getting about rupees 400 crore, all the other neighborhood countries, like for instance, Bangladesh, okay, Sri Lanka, Mauritius, Nepal, Seychelles, the allocations for these countries are declining, or they're lesser than in the previous year. For Afghanistan, we do not recognize basically the Taliban, but yet, in fact, it remains at 200 crores. And the reason, of course, for remaining at 200 crores is because this is supposed to be for the people. It actually keeps the door open for diplomacy. So this is the reason that is kind of done there. Now, why increase for Bhutan, 41.04% for Bhutan? Primarily, one must see it in the context of India's foreign policy. All this must be seen in the context of India's foreign policy. What is being prioritized and what is not, or what will be prioritized and what will not be prioritized. It's basically from the estimated budget that we see. Because Bhutan, China's threat to Bhutan is increasing, and of course, consequently, to India. So basically, the assistance that is given there for infrastructure development, etc., well, one can understand it in that context. Maldives is in the IOR, all right, as such, where again, India is trying to basically increase its impact, okay? So Maldives also, but why not Seychelles, etc.? If you look at the countries where it has gone down, one also sees that, well, basically, in these countries where India's development assistance is going down, China's development assistance or China's assistance, okay, has been going up, okay? Now, whether this has anything to do with India's assistance going down is something that maybe my co-panelists can throw light on, but I have a feeling that, well, it is prioritizing Bhutan and Maldives over the other countries, so far as neighborhood first policy is concerned. Now, the other thing that I want to point out is that also we are looking at neighborhood first policy. What about look east policy or act east policy? Now, here one hardly sees, earmarked money or data as such for Southeast Asian projects or something like that. One sees instead that allocation of funds for the Nalanda University, the ongoing construction in the Nalanda University has increased. And basically, this is being kind of touted as part of the look east policy, but one does not see other things over here. So far as West Asia is concerned, the money for Chabahar port, okay, that actually still remains at 100 crores. Now, Chabahar port is one of the most important items so far as India's foreign policy is concerned, because it opens the door not only to the West Asia, but also basically to Central Asia and to Afghanistan from the other side. So trade, etc., through Chabahar port. And yet, in fact, there's no increase in the money allocated for Chabahar port. Now, this one, if one looks deeper into that, primarily one can look at basically Iran's relations with the United States, or other US relations with Iran, US relations with India, and in that context, a certain wariness, or it as such, of increasing, okay, allocation over there. Now, the other thing that one sees in the MEA is basically money which is allocated for the Passport Seva project 2.0, okay, where you find an allocation of 1,002.76 crore, and e-migrate version 2.0, okay, where again there's been an increase. Now this, well, the passport already, so far as the Passport Seva project is concerned, this will upgrade technological, well, it's a technological application of the passport services, and e-migrate basically is technological upscaling of services to facilitate worker outflow from the country. Now, well, digitization and technological upgradation, of course, is part of Prime Minister Modi's overall outlook. But what also one needs to notice is that elections, of course, the entire budget, whether it's for foreign policy or basically for defense or, well, other sectors which we're not discussing today, we find that there's a people first policy over here, okay, because of the elections which are going to soon be here. Now, what I'm going to talk about here just for the next few minutes is that there's little innovation so far as foreign policy allocations are concerned. It's only basically a question of increasing or decreasing allocation for ongoing projects and items, and not really money set aside for something new. Now, here I'd like to point out that one of the focus of the Modi government has been Africa. Now, here, this continent, I need to point out, of course, that Africa is resource rich, and in the future, well, it's going to become more and more important. Lots of countries are interested primarily in Africa, and India too is, of course, increasing its footprint over there. But well, apart from China, there are other players also which aren't. Now, the point that I want to make is that money should have been set aside for increasing the number of embassies and consulates. There are 54 countries, about 28 consulates and embassies are there, and they're building some more, they're new ones. Also, there's a lack of connectivity with the African continent. Most of our travel routes are through the Middle East. Okay, direct connectivity is missing. Now, certain countries like South Africa, all right, there you find connectivity, plus in fact, embassies and consulates in more than one city, but certain other countries are completely bypassed. Now, if you're going to build up relations with the AU, with African countries, with basically the RECs in Africa, we need actually to build more consulates and embassies to have more foreign diplomats over there. So basically, you find this ignored. Now, in the defense sector also, one finds this kind of lacunae, because what I find is that although there has been an increase in the defense allocation, it is heavy on salaries and pensions and very light on research and development. Now, this reflects old-fashioned thinking. Basically, especially in the context of the changing global defense scenario, there is a problem over here. Although there is an increase or rate as such of 16% from the last year's union budget, and when you look at basically the first union budget of 2014-2015 of Prime Minister Modi, there is almost a 100% jump, because the defense budget then was something like 2.24 lakh crores. Now, of course, it's 5.93 lakh crores. Okay, but if you look at the content, now everyday expenditure and salaries and pensions form the bulk of the defense budget of FY 2024, comprising about 68% of the total outlay, while the provision for defense capital expenditure is only around rupees 1.62 lakh crores, which includes equipment procurement, armed forces modernization, upgradation of existing systems and equipment, etc. In fact, while the defense capex is around 1.62 lakhs, as I mentioned, 6.12 lakh crores that I mentioned, pension expenditure is going to be around rupees 1.38 lakh crores. Now, given the constant threats along the Pakistani border and the incremental threats on the northern borders with China, India needs to spend a lot more on defense R&D to create relevant infrastructure development and adopt modern technology. In fact, what you find is the budget planners need to realize that the changes in defense technology are there, and they're there for good, and they need to adapt. Okay, especially if you look basically at the Ukraine war. Now, the Gulf War of 1991 and the Afghanistan War of 2001 used new technology, and in fact, the successes of the United States and the West basically were largely due to long-range missiles and high-flying bombers and satellite technology. But already, if you look at the Ukraine war, these are becoming passé because Ukraine has shot down high-flying Russian aircraft with long-range missiles, and basically they're using drones to bomb ships far off the coast. Now, emerging technologies include hypersonics, which China has, drones, loitering munitions, electronic warfare and jamming, cyber weapons, and AI capability, which would actually potentially take drone warfare to new levels. In the Ukraine war, Ukraine and Russia have both used satellite, drones, AI, and cyber capability in concert with traditional military hardware. NATO, in fact, has launched a €1 billion investment fund for innovation. For instance, the use of AI for transcription and translation services to analyze intercepted communications and codes. Now, the advocacy, what you find is
Professor Bhattacharya, if you could wind up and we could
can I
segue.
just take 2 minutes more, please? Yeah.
Yes.
Just want to say that India's defense budget should not be measured in terms of quantum of funds allocated, but basically in terms of threat mitigation and the needs of force modernization across multiple domains, especially in the context of modern missile systems like hypersonics, which have been developed by China. In September 2022, the government of India basically started the PLI scheme to spur manufacturing of drones and drone components in India. But drone technology has already gone way beyond this, underlying the significance of allocating more funds for defense R&D. Now, of course, one must basically, before I end, just 2 points, okay? One is that budgeting for all sectors remains a zero-sum game. The budget outlay actually being circumscribed by total revenue the government generates via taxes and miscellaneous means and non-tax revenue, okay? So which means that money is limited. Now, India's debt to GDP ratio has also been running high of over 80% since 2020 and is likely to remain high for some more years. Now, given this kind of economic constraint, it is impractical to expect the large-scale allocations for foreign policy and defense to the exclusion of critical sectors like health, agriculture, infrastructure, internal security, etc. But at the same time, and this is my second point, okay, India aims high, and the objective, of course, is to become a developed nation and a global player. And what one must point out is that one cannot use foreign policy and defense policy by looking just at basically the MEA and the defense ministry alone, okay? One must look at basically the entire scenario holistically because, well, foreign policy and defense policy does not really include only, all right, as such, these two ministries, but ministries that deal with trade and investment, import-export, clean green energy, building roads and infrastructure for defense, communication systems, dual-use technologies involving AI, cybernetics, so ministries which deal with these, okay? So there is this kind of interrelationship between ministries so far as foreign policy and defense policy are concerned. And therefore, basically, one really has to look at all these, the allocations for these things. And you see, there is no time here, of course, to kind of do that. Well, these relationships are there. And one must look at basically other ministries and how much has been allocated for certain things and where, or red building roads, not just tunnels, okay, in Arunachal Pradesh or in the northern sector, but basically also roads which will tie up, all right, our borders with the interior. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am. You have really provided a wonderful overview of the entire discussion where we could proceed towards. So since you were ending with the defense allocations, I would request Major General K Chakravorty to take from here as to if you could share your views on the defense budget, and especially when the three forces had asked for more funds in their presentations to the MOD, yet much of their demands have not been fulfilled in the numbers. How does our national security objectives align with the overall outlay?
Thank you, Dr. Simi, for inviting me. I'd also like to thank Professor Bhattacharya and also the details of the data which has already been covered about the defense budget. Well, I would put it, see, all the services always demand more, and as you right in the beginning, it was brought out, a budget has to be, see the allotment to the overall, all sectors, and defense happens to be one of them. The most important part is the comprehensive national power of a nation, and this is decided by the economy. If your economy is strong, everything is strong. And well, as far as the defense budget is concerned, the figures have been given. 5.94 crores, well, depending on what the value of the dollar is today, they're around $70 billion, which is a very, very modest sum for any country. I mean, it's approximately, as I calculated, it's 1.97% of the GDP. When you take Pakistan, even today, it's in dire economic straits. It has got 3.5% of the GDP being given for defense. I'm just giving you China today, it's almost, the defense budget of China is very, very difficult to really find out, but it's around $350 to $400 billion. And well, if you have to face a two-front war, I mean, so you're facing these two fronts, which are very live, Pakistan as well as China, and you have borders which have to be guarded. You've got the Indian Ocean, which is brought out very clearly, which again is an important area, which needs to be effectively dominated by the Navy, then definitely you need money for it. Now, how do I place and what do we do? Well, one figure which I would like to touch upon is what is the capital outlay? It is 1.62 crores. Now, this means that our modernization, which we are on, will continue. But obviously, the pace of modernization would not be what we would like to be with the 1.62 crores as the capital outlay. So therefore, we see part of the what you call 1.62 crores would go in what is known as payment of what you call for items which have already been procured or which are in the pipeline. And the rest is whatever you want in addition. Our list is huge. I mean to say it starts from aircraft carriers, strategic weapons, and last of all, most important, we must understand what does China's focus mean. China's focus is on two issues, artificial intelligence, cyber warfare. Now, when we look at defense, we really just don't look at borders. I mean, so India is today, as has been rightly called, a middle power. If we are a middle power, then we definitely have to go well beyond our borders. And for that, our forces must have the capability to modernize, to project itself, particularly in the areas which Professor Bhattacharya said about, even the areas which are we see the Act East policy in the Asia Pacific. We have already assets over there. Is the Indian Navy with the budget capable of projecting itself in the South China Sea? Is the Indian Army capable of undertaking its tasks with the budget? And the next question is the border roads have been allocated 5,000 crores, which is much higher than what was allotted earlier. Will we be today able to have the infrastructure available on our borders to face our adversary, particularly the northern adversary? So these are the questions which we have to ask. And well, we are, as you are aware, that I mean, say, unlike any other country, we have our forces deployed on the borders. Let's take both Eastern Ladakh and Arunachal. We have our deployments fully done. And just now, Professor Bhattacharya spoke about Bhutan. Well, Bhutan is not only a neighbor, but a strategic neighbor. I mean, say that, when you look at the border and when you look at the Chinese domination and the way they look at it, definitely we have to be ready for any contingency with regard to Bhutan. The next thing which I would like to point out is the issues regarding pensions. Our defense budget includes payment to defense civilians, also includes the pensions. Now, normally they do not form a part of the defense budget, but since it's included, then definitely the higher allocation means that the one rank, one pension, which the Supreme Court has said that payments which have to be made, government has catered for this. The next point which I would like to say as far as the budget is concerned is that the details of the budget come out very, very slowly, particularly as regards field of defense is concerned. It is not an area which, you can straight away come to know what is the impact going to be. And next is, the point is that while we keep on stressing on the issue of Atmanirbhar and the indigenization of defense products, the main issue which I would say is Atmanirbhar must lead to greater defense exports. It is not, after all, how much can the Indian Army, the Indian Navy, and the Indian Air Force consume out of all the defense products which you are going to make. Unless you can stand up and your defense products find them place in the external market, I am afraid that the defense industry, which is the most important thing to see that the defense sector is able to thrive, will have a very, very difficult time. The next issue which I would like to say is the revenue part of the budget. The revenue part of the budget has definitely gone up. Well, this is regarding our payments and the also allocations for maintenance of it. You would agree that as far as we are concerned, we believe in that what we call 30% of the equipment must be which you call state of the art, and 30% would be obsolete, and about 40% would need upgradation. So the maintenance of the equipment, maintenance of buildings, maintenance of everything is extremely important. All in all, I just come to it that it would be every budget leaves the defense services with one word: innovation and prioritization. As you have correctly brought out, nobody can get everything. You cannot get the moon and you'll never get it. But yet you have to do your best, and that's where the defense forces have to prioritize. A major issue which is now possibly being done by the defense forces is the process of outsourcing. A big push is being given to outsource many, many areas. If one looks at today, the Ukraine war, I think it's one area which has been totally outsourced. I wouldn't go into too much details, but I think if one has to look at how a war is to be fought by outsourcing, I think Ukraine is the best example. Everything has been outsourced. So the Indian armed forces are also looking at outsourcing. We are looking at in a big way how to bring in, various sectors which are today, that is to how you can bring about greater combat strength. You're well aware that for 2 years, we haven't carried out any recruitment. Correctly brought out that the Agniveers have now started coming in, and this is the first part of the recruitment. But do not forget that the Agniveers are going to last only for a limited period of time, and 25% would be there. So we would have to carry out this subject of outsourcing. We can discuss it later, which you could want to see. Another point, because this is my initial issue, which I would like to say is that, we have got to have a credible nuclear deterrence. Now, when you say credible nuclear deterrence, means all the three parts, the three components means land, sea, and air. Now, when you look at it, you got your missiles, which gives you a credible from the land, and also you got your aircrafts. But as far as the sea is concerned, the minimum requirement is about 3 submarines, nuclear submarines, which are capable to the country to be available at any point of time, one being under refit, one ready for firing nuclear weapons, and the other going to be ready. Now, this is what is credible nuclear deterrence. If you don't have it, you're faced with 2 nuclear powers. While everything looks hunky-dory when we sit in the room and we find that, oh no, today everything is looking okay. But whenever things go wrong, defense forces have no time to react. They have to have response mechanisms, and these response mechanisms have to be thought about well in advance. I would leave it at that, and therefore say that, well, the budget is something which is available to us. It is at 1.97% of the GDP. Any country which is expecting to do well should have about 2.5% of its allocation of its budget, defense budget for the GDP. And if you don't have it, then, well, it's for the defense forces now to get down to 2 words: innovation, prioritization, which we have been doing and we will continue doing, and we will ensure that the nation is served to the best of its ability. I think I'll just give the others a chance now.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. So innovation and prioritization. So these were the keywords with which Major General has ended. I now request Professor Swaran Singh to take it from here and give us your sense of the budget with respect to especially the major countries, sir, on their defense and foreign policy. And where are the gaps according to you? And especially when innovation and prioritization has to be there for India, and we do not have 2.5% of the allocation in the defense sector. So over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Simi Mehta, and compliments to your team at IMPRI Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies. I'm delighted to follow from Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, my senior colleague, and of course General Chakravorty. And I look forward to listening to Mr. Ravindra Sachdev also. I'm delighted to see that you have clubbed defense and foreign policy together, because as India emerges as an influential player in international system, the calibration of these two together will have to be really worked upon, both in terms of, as General said, innovation and prioritization to maximize influence, not just power, but influence in global circles. As India's responsibilities move from just its domestic responsibilities to regional issues to now global issues. And with that kind of picture in mind, this budget was presented as the first budget of Amrit Kal, which means this is kind of a first step in next 25 years of period that India wants to visualize itself moving forward. And at this first step, we know India today is the 5th largest economy. World Bank, IMF is, endorsing this to be fastest growing among major economies, 7 to 8%. We have a bulging middle class, youth. So we talk about demographic and democratic dividend that India has in terms of its increasing global visibility, which has to gradually turn into credibility. And in that sense, I think the budget has a certain way of indicating where India should be moving forward. And, the simple thing that the budget talks about government spending of roughly around $550 billion US is a reflection of the kind of investment that government through the budget is trying to indicate, and how it can really make the difference enormously. I'll restrict my remarks to 5-7 minutes, as you had mentioned, to just basically say 2 to 3 things about both defense and the foreign affairs part of the budget. And there is a lot of talk about 13% growth rate in the defense budget, which clearly indicates India's concerns about long overdue modernization, and of course also the immediate huge forward deployment and China challenge. But as General just mentioned, it remains still below 2% of GDP, and therefore it's not inordinately large. I wouldn't compare it to the percentage that Pakistan spends on defense, because that's a very different kind of armed forces that they have compared to most other major powers that we talk about. But yes, this upgradation of 13% growth in the budget is interesting. But as was also underlined, bulk of defense budgets around the world go to maintenance, salaries and pensions and things like these. And some part of it, on average around the world, about 17 to 20% is capital outlays. And what actually gives the punch, ammunitions, on average world defense budgets have about 2 to 3% of that part. And 5 to 7% part, depending on which country we are talking, goes into research and development. So we have to keep in mind that even when we talk about $72.6 billion of budget of India, bulk of it is not going to add to the punch. So we have to really then, as General said, focus on innovation and prioritization to add that punch, because about $50+ billion are simply going into salaries and pensions. So we have to remember that. How to maximize the punch would depend on prioritization and innovation. We have a large army, which I always say is also not just fighting on the borders. 14 lakh people are well-trained, physically fit, morally sort of robust. So when they come back to society, they add to our everyday life in enormous way. So, even when we pay in terms of salaries, we are creating an enormous workforce, which will be useful not just when they are serving the country as soldiers, but also when they are no longer, sort of wearing the uniform in that sense. Second element is interesting to see if India wants to peg itself as, one of the major countries around the world, and India has increasing expectations around the world in terms of whether it is UN peacekeeping or other roles that Indian armed forces are playing. We have to then look at it, the gap that we have to still meet. This year only, US defense budget is about $858 billion. And Chinese say their budget is about $230 billion, but General said it could be as high as $400 billion. So when we compare our stature in terms of global power, we have to keep in mind that there are limitations that the budget still has. And of course, that would call for raising India's economic size itself. Second element of the Ministry of External Affairs, I think that is again interesting, but perhaps government has underlined the priority in that sense, because this compared to defense budget being nearly 2% of GDP, MEA's budget is roughly around 0.4% of the GDP in that sense, is extremely limited in that sense. But as Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya mentioned, foreign policy is basically, the broad bandwidth is determined by Ministry of Foreign Affairs, but it's not, foreign policy is not conducted by Ministry of Foreign Affairs alone. There are a lot of other ministries like Commerce and Industry Ministry, for example, Science and Technology, Sports and Youth Affairs, even tourism and education. They contribute a great deal to how foreign policy is implemented in that sense. So that has to be taken care of. Two things that I quickly want to underline is one, that given the situation of pandemic, Ministry of External Affairs last year could not even spend the money that was allocated to Ministry of Foreign Affairs. The money that was allocated was something like 17,250 crores, and it could spend only 16,910 crores of rupees. So sometimes that also comes into the picture. So why the increase is not as much. Of course, this year they've increased the budget slightly, not very, very impressively. But two things that we have been hearing for a long time, and in fact, the 17th Lok Sabha Standing Committee had in their recommendations mentioned that there is an urgent need to expand MEA's budget, is what are we expecting MEA to do? Long time debate about whether we need to expand numbers of our diplomatic cadre. Because countries that we are comparing ourselves with, China and United States, has roughly around maybe 10 times the workforce that works for them. In case of China, Chinese Communist Party has a parallel cadre that again works with all countries. So it's a very different kind of competition that Indian Ministry of External Affairs faces in that sense to deal with those situations. And this year, of course, India is looking at historic opportunity of presidency of G20, which is, as we keep always saying, 85% of global GDP, 75% of global trade. It's an inordinate group of 6 out of 9 nuclear weapon states are there. So it's a very great opportunity for India to showcase that global leadership. Of course, Shanghai Cooperation Organization presidency. Separate allocations, as was underlined, have been made for those responsibilities to be borne. And India now has also to push its trade and commerce, is my second element, which Ministry of External Affairs has to again work to ensure that, India, for example, had walked out of the 15-nation RCEP, Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, and is now, for example, also not too sure, has opted out of the trade pillar of Indo-Pacific Economic Framework again. So if India has to really become much around the world, countries are now part of these regional economic frameworks, regional kind of economic alignments. India has to look at what to do. India's concerns have always been, for example, India's skilled manpower getting access in foreign markets, India's micro, small, and medium industries being sort of vulnerable, and of course, enormous trade deficits. Budget seeks to address some of these issues so that India can engage with some of these major regional trade and commerce related alignments. MSMEs were mentioned thrice, I think, in the speech by Nirmala Sitharaman. 9,000 crores are separately allocated to help them sort of be more competitive. And, in that sense, there are elements where India has to depend on Ministry of Foreign Affairs to help India to expand its trade and commerce. India, as we know, has crossed now $400 billion of exports this year. Target is $470 billion. So in that sense, I think this kind of how foreign policy can help much more in economic diplomacy. Inordinate dependence on China, for example, 17% of India's imports are still coming from China, despite all the tensions that we keep talking about. And lots of these are things that can be easily produced in India. So a lot of rectification, course correction is something which will be required. And I think a lot of it is covered in the budget that is presented for this year. But of course, fundamental limitation when India wants to stand next to United States and China as a major power in coming times remains expanding the size of the pie. And I think that is where we have to focus as to how to increase India's GDP and how to achieve the target of 5 trillion economy by 2025, which seems not an easy target as of now. And once we are able to expand that GDP, of course, then more allocations can be made in all various sectors. So it's a kind of a mixed situation of a lot of juggling that the budget has done to satisfy as many sectors as possible. But I think a lot remains still, expected of how the coming budgets would be formulated and whether priorities could be identified. To me, in terms of last word on innovation and prioritization, would mean a lot of infusion with the civil society and media and think tanks like yours for foreign policy, and lots of private-public partnership when it comes to defense. Some of it is already being tried, but I think a lot of bold initiatives would be required in co-opting some of these other stakeholders to be part of the national effort to sort of go towards becoming a major power in coming times, a major influence around the world in coming times. And that is how budget could maximize the output from even the limited resources. And let me stop here, and I look forward to listening to others. And if there are any comments and questions for me, I'll be happy to answer. Back to
Sure.
Simi.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I just have a follow-up question on the before I move to Mr. Robinder. My question is about increasing the MEA cadre, which you mentioned in the passing. So we have really moved away from really increasing the number of foreign service officers into recruiting consultants. And even their tenure is fixed, say for 2 years and then renewable for another 2 years. So is the task momentary? Is it transitory? And are we really attaining the objectives of promoting putting our objectives of being a global leader in that sense of the term by this kind of a temporary arrangement?
Thank you. Now I look forward to listening to Mr. Sachdeva. I'll be very short in replying to you. This is almost a decade that we have seen these efforts of co-opting some of the younger scholars as consultants or interns, mostly not very streamlined, as my experience with some of my students have been. There should be clearly defined responsibilities given to people who are co-opted like this. And greater reluctance has been in co-opting at senior level. The lateral entries that have been tried in very, very few places have been extremely limited. I can understand that skepticism that civil service sometimes has of people who are not kind of trained and maybe tuned into thinking like government officials. But lateral entries are not supposed to do that. Lateral entries are supposed to be focused on a certain task, and they are supposed to achieve that task. And I think a lot more streamlining of lateral entries at senior level, and of course, co-option of lots and lots of short-term, just like we are talking of Agniveer for armed forces, you have to really streamline the role that you can give to a lot of younger, bright scholars coming from various universities with their doctoral degrees. They can definitely make an enormous difference, provided they are given responsibilities. Very often they are kind of co-opted, but what they are supposed to do is sometimes not very clear. Sometimes some of these give a feedback that perhaps there is a trust issue, and there are issues of not giving access, etc. I have only heard these things, but I think that is where maximization of output can be done. Efforts have also been made, for example, for about a decade now, the intake of Indian Foreign Service has also been doubled. It used to be 15, at some stage around 15 to now almost 35, 37. That's one part, but I think just like you see a lot of other countries, including United States, China, they depend on a lot of co-option on a short-term basis. And I think India has to really expand that. And that actually gives a lot of flexibility to government to sort of let people go if they are not really worth the kind of task they are assigned. And that flexibility, in fact, should be advantage of the government. And I think I agree with you, Simi, that is where I think a lot of maximization of what government can achieve through innovation and prioritization, as General has mentioned, can be done. And I think that's an excellent point you made. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. It has always been a delight to listen to you, whether here or in the classroom, as you've been my teacher in the School of International Studies in my MA days. Thank you so much, sir. I now move on to Mr. Rabinder Sachdev. Sir, yes, you have a presentation to make, and during the course of the presentation, if you could also throw some light on the how the budget translates into attaining the objectives of diplomacy, especially given that this is the G20 presidency year for India and also that of SCO. Sir, over to you.
Thank you so much, Simi. I will try to cover that point. Okay. So could we have a presentation, please? If you could start here. Sure.
Oh, yes, sir.
Okay. Thank you very much for organizing this discussion, and a pleasure to listen to eminent minds before me. And I'm sure that in the audience also there are scholars and thinkers and such who would be listening to this discussion. So what I thought was actually to structure my talk. And in fact, if you see, as all eminent scholars or teachers and professors before me have covered about the budget, so perchance I've kind of, not delved more into it. So let's get into what I thought to share. Okay, on optopolitics and on weaponizing peace. Next, please. A little bit about us, but the key point what I want to say is that in this presentation, I'll highlight 3 intellectual constructs, okay, which maybe could be of use, which maybe could be built upon, or which maybe could be deconstructed as not being viable, but I think worth tossing and testing. So there are 3 constructs that I will present. Next, please. Firstly, the future. I don't know, but overall in a big picture, if you see, I mean, one can anticipate that there is a 3rd World War, a 4th, and a 5th one. In a way, I feel the 3rd World War is already on, or whatever form or shape it may take. Next would be in the Indo-Pacific theater. And then a fifth one would come back to Europe. And that is the parallel of Germany, World War I, World War II. Russia defeated, humiliated, whatever, pygmy-ized, will have some kind of a renaissance, nationalism, etc. In 20, 25 years, it will come back to establish itself. But who knows? So, but in a way, I mean, that's the world that we are in. So three constructs that I'll share would be, one is optopolitics, one is a lemonade mindset, and the third is weaponizing peace. And in fact, I think all of these to some extent or other have actually been referred by all eminent speakers before me. First one, optopolitics. You know, we use the term geopolitics, yeah, sure. But more and more, as we are seeing, it's becoming optics mixed with geopolitics, right? The optics or the narratives we get, the propagandas, what the media says, insufficient data, ground intelligence, a self-bias that we have when we process the information and all that is optics. So the world of today that we are seeing and dealing with, I think may be better looked upon if we look at it from a view of optopolitics, for example, in addition to geopolitics. An example of, optopolitics, I would say this incident with the Chinese balloon. Okay, there's a lot of geopolitics happening between the US and China. Okay, and it is layered with propaganda about the other, the self, who is right, who is wrong, insufficient information and all. So what really is playing out in the world of today is optopolitics about the Chinese balloon incident. Next. The second construct, next slide, please. You've gone up. Yeah. Now, next. The next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. Now, this is something actually which has been mentioned by all our three speakers, and I'll identify what I mean to say is that, see, the lemonade mindset, the idea, the saying we all have heard often maybe is, when life hands you a lemon, make lemonade. It is a mindset of motivation, creative thinking, jugaad, frugal innovation, and hope. That, let's say, that bundle of a mindset. Life has given us a lemon, or life gives someone a lemon, let us make lemonade, or let me make lemonade. So that's the mindset we have to get into. Next slide, please. So example, the union budget. As all eminent colleagues before me have mentioned that, we have our own constraints, okay? And we have to try and make the best out of whatever we have. And the main thing which everyone has highlighted is the fact that the key is economic growth. Our defense budget can only go up if our economy goes up. Okay. And as far as the budget is concerned, mostly it's tinkering. The governments do not have much flexibility to allocate, let's say, $1 billion or a few or $10 billion into some new projects tomorrow. Most of the money goes into schemes, program, pensions, or ammunition programs, whatever you may say, salaries, already which is pre-decided, or which has to be done, right? So there's very little leeway for any government to increase much the budgets unless our economy improves. And the other one aspect so we have to make lemonade with whatever money we have, we have to make the best out of it. The second thing which I think which General Chakravorty mentioned, in terms of our defense industry and Atmanirbharta and all, we have a problem. We have a structural problem. There is only one buyer for any defense item which is produced in India. So let's say there are 3 private companies all trying to figure out and make the best tank possible. The Indian government MOD will buy from only one of them. What happens to the investments of the other 2? Private industry cannot do that. The way out, as General Chakravorty mentioned, is focus on exports, and which I've mentioned in my note here, could be improved by similarly saying that creating consortium of buyers. India could link up with some friendly countries and, okay, fine, 3, 4, and then whatever is made in India could also be offered to some such friendly countries. Thereby, our manufacturers here could have a bigger pie, or could have a bigger, pool where to sell potentially if their products are good. That is a problem for us, and it will continue unless somehow, or we just keep on stumbling along and keep making lemonade. Next, please. And I've got only a few slides remaining. Construct 3, weaponize peace. See, when we go to war or wherever we are, sure, we carry our guns and bombs and missiles and drones and AIs and all we have to do now. But in addition to it, I think we should carry a little weapon of peace in our back pockets. And I will give 2 examples right now. Objective of this is, if we weaponize peace, it's a tool. It's a tool to push the enemy, quote unquote, I'm using the term, on the back foot in the optopolitics of today. It also helps our world image that apart from everything else, we are also talking, or we have a model of a peace process or a peace deal. We have a model. It improves our image in the world. It also improves our image amongst the commons in the quote unquote enemy country or the other country, which bears ill intention to us. It improves our image. Okay, these guys are at least also talking peace, maybe. And of course, it can be used in negotiations. And sometime in the future, probably, who knows, it could yield peace dividends for us and the quote unquote other country. So weaponizing peace is something we should look and toss out. Next slide, please. I have 2 examples here. My one example is it the time to drop a peace bomb on Pakistan? I will explain what I mean. Pakistan is in a deep economic crisis. IMF will not be able to help it out at all. This $1 billion here, there will be drip. After this, Pakistan has to go to the Paris Club, which has to get all its debtor countries, the Paris Club countries, to agree to a common formula for bailing out, okay, for taking a haircut. Countries of the Paris Club could take a haircut, but commercial lenders will not take a haircut. The Goldman Sachs of the world, the Vanguards, the Fidelity, all of these who have investments in Pakistan, they will not like to take a haircut. And IMF will start releasing money only once there is all of these guys are on the same page. More on that later. Even now, Pakistan will have to reduce its military pensions and military budget. General Chakravorty was mentioning about Pakistan's military budget, maybe 3.5%. Pakistan, very smartly, since Musharraf's time, does not include the military pensions under the military budget, defense budget. It has very smartly put that under the civil budget. Now, what IMF is asking Pakistan is that you bring that budget into your defense budget and overall cut down your defense budget. Then, of course, we know that. So how Pakistan would do that, we don't know, but it will have to do. Tax increases, we've heard, reduce government salaries and employees, staff. Pakistan has pledged portions of Karachi airport, portions of Lahore airport, portions of toll roads. Pakistan Radio owns 61 buildings across the country. Portions of Pakistan Radio, the legal entity, have been pledged to lenders. These portions which have been pledged would be taken over by lenders. Last June, Pakistan cabinet also approved that Karachi port, seaport, could also be pledged. Pakistan has already also pledged over $2.5 billion of its stock in its state-owned banks. Let's say like the State Bank of Pakistan. Shares of State Bank of Pakistan are pledged to some lenders. So some of these would have to be taken away. Some of these would have to be pledged further. So Pakistan is in a royal mess. Next, please, slide. I'll give an example of Sri Lanka to understand what's going to happen with Pakistan. Sri Lanka has still not received any IMF money. IMF money is contingent upon other lenders to Sri Lanka coming to a common page. Specifically in the case of Sri Lanka, it's India, Japan, and China. India and Japan are agreeing to a moratorium of 10 years or 15 years. China is not agreeing. China is asking for a moratorium of only 2 years. Till the time these 3 bilateral lenders agree IMF is not going to release any loans to Sri Lanka. It is stuck. Sri Lanka has promised and is reducing its troops from 180,000 to 135,000 next year, and will bring it down to 100,000 troops by the end of the next 5 years. Pakistan would need to maybe do something like this. Sri Lankan Airlines, Sri Lankan Telecom are all on the chopping block. Sri Lanka has to reduce government staff, salaries, and of course, I'm not even going into the increase of taxes, income tax, personal tax, corporate tax, GST, etc. This is what's happening with Sri Lanka as of now. More or less a similar fate awaits Pakistan. Next slide, please. So is it time for, so my reading in this is that Pakistan, even this $1 billion with IMF will take it another few months. Pakistan, the next 10 years will be in a dark hole. Is it time for India to drop a peace bomb? Blue sky thinking, work back room with the IMF, with the US and Paris Club, India. Create a structure. And then India offers a deal to Pakistan. $5 billion immediate aid, or let's say $1 billion immediate and $4 billion within 3 months. Second, we declare a treaty of, or let's both, we will, subject to our conditions, a treaty of live and let live Indo-Pakistan. And we will open trade and investments with Pakistan. The conditions we ask, reduce your defense budget by 30% within the next 1 year. In any case, IMF is going to ask them. Reduce your budget to 50% by the next 5 years. We are not your enemy. Give us a commitment in writing that you stop tom-tomming about Kashmir world over. It's over, it's past. Give us a commitment in writing that you will stop promoting cross-border terrorism. All national political parties of Pakistan have to sign up on this document. Advantages to Pakistan? Money will flow in. It will be able to reduce defense expense and put that into more productive needs of the real country. Okay, education, healthcare, infrastructure, whatever, etc. And peace and long-term development. Why not? I mean, see, these are the kind of, potentialities we could look and think and explore. Next slide, please. And that's the last one, I think. Second, an example again of weaponizing peace. India-China Gardens of Peace. How and when will India and China have long-term peace? Maybe. The total length of the boundary itself is disputed. Keep aside Aksai and Arunachal Pradesh. The LAC is not defined. It's a meandering. We can imagine it as a meandering river. Somewhere it's 10 kilometers wide, somewhere 100 kilometers wide, somewhere 2 kilometers wide. So this width of the river is perhaps the LAC. There are about 40 to 45 points disputed along this LAC of varying widths, maybe. Can we both agree to define and create these disputed points as no man's lands? Neither ours nor yours. So be it. Of course, we'll also look at our strategic interest and our military interest, our vantage points. We don't want to lose. China will also want to lose. So there's going to be a long, tough road. And firstly, will China does not even talk to us. And should we even propose this to China? No, because if we propose, then we sound maybe coming from a weaker position. But the point is, we need to start carrying this in our back pocket as a long-term ideation sometime. Could we start a pilot, let's say with Galwan? What's happening in Galwan? There's a standoff. They've retreated some, we've retreated some, we don't know who's where, etc. But all of this drama is happening within the LAC. Could we get commonly to agree to create this standoff zone where they're about 5 kilometers away from us and we have 5 and we are not patrolling or they're patrolling? Create it as a garden of peace, as a pilot project. Let us see. Weaponize peace. Thank you very much.
Brilliant presentation, sir. Amazing. It really made me think about the prospect of peace between India and Pakistan. But I really doubt whether the hawks in both the countries
Sure.
are really willing, and the politics especially.
May
How
I
would
agree.
it?
It may
Yes, sir.
not, but this here is a community of strategic thinkers, long-term
Absolutely.
thinkers, right? We have to be toying and tossing these, and then let's see who knows. And I completely, we much more than understand, all of us here, that these are impossible ideas maybe, but in fact, this time to drop peace bomb on Pakistan, we are going to put out a press statement tomorrow on this.
Amazing, amazing. I think that
Think
is
about
very important. At least make that conversation rolling, and maybe this can be a part of the larger agenda of Akhand Bharat. Who knows? So thank you so much for that wonderful presentation. So I would now move on to one question that has come from Satyam, and Satyam, would you like to discuss this with the panelist yourself? Okay, so I'll read the question. India released a list banning certain weapon imports that are in the stages of development in India. Is it not impacting the defense preparedness in India? Major General, would you like to take this question?
Thank you, Dr. Simi.
Yes.
Well, let's be very clear. We have drawn a list, and these lists also have got a timeline by which we are supposed to be indigenizing. By no means are we saying that we are not going to import weapons at all. It's an impossible thing. We'll talk firstly and make it very simple. Let's talk about the United States. I'll just take two components. First is the iPad or Apple. 85% of the components are made in China. Boeing aircraft, 85% of the components are made in China. So when we say that we make a list, you must look at the list in great details. It's only about, say, whatever the number. I would not like to get into it because everybody knows what the numbers are and the thing. By no means it's impacting us. You see, all said and done, unless you lay down for yourself that you are going to indigenize, let's say, it's so heartening to see that today your fighter aircraft Tejas has landed on INS Vikrant.
Yes, Vikrant.
You must understand Vikrant is an aircraft carrier made by India. It's not Vikramaditya. Now it's a great thing. Talk to anybody in the world for a fighter aircraft made in India to land. So this is what we are trying to achieve. By no means are we saying that we'll not get ultralight houses. By no means are we saying that we are going to not get imports. I mean to say, Professor Swaran Singh rightly brought out how much imports we are getting from China. I think, and from the United States, from everybody, we are getting a lot of imports. We cannot, it's an interdependent world. And our armed forces are also dependent on many countries. Like, I would say, let's look at it today. The Ukraine war is on. We are all surviving because Russia is giving us energy at a price which makes it affordable for our economy to go on. It's nice for the sir to put on all these slides about Pakistan, China, peace. Well, I have spent my entire life, it is 55 years since I joined the National Defense Academy. Believe me, there's not been a night which I have not spent in only trying to get peace for our country. Every night I am writing or reading or speaking or telling or attending to military issues of military people. But let me put it to you. I just put it in very simple academic terms. The line of actual control is 3,488 kilometers as far as India is concerned. China says it's 2,000 kilometers. Now, you please tell me, where's the meeting point? Pakistan. I do remember before the 65 war, luckily I've seen all the prime ministers of the country. Believe me or not, one of the most fortunate persons to have seen this, seen them functioning. And at a very young age, at the age of 9, I became a boarder. In those days in India, my father sent me to a boarding school where English was being taught by people who came from England. And I may put it to you that very, very clearly, as far as Pakistan is concerned, I think I can straight away name that before the 65 war, they were economically far better than India. Ayub Khan, as per all records, did not want to attack India. The one man who ensured that both Bangladesh was created, the nuclear weapon was created, as well as the 1965 Operation Gibraltar and everything was done, was Zulfikar Ali Bhutto. So when you have such people, and he was educated in the United States, and see all these economic figures, since I have spent a lot of time abroad, I keep going abroad, I keep speaking abroad to military people, obviously. Let me put it to you. Nice to say that Pakistan will not live. I haven't seen any country packing up. These things keep happening. They live through it. I was surprised. I always take what is the higher end. The number of BMWs going to Pakistan have rather increased in the last 1 month. Now, I mean to say, you would agree it's something strange. Military people in Pakistan are still the richest, and their relations are the richest. And last of all, to answer the question directly to the person, by no means are these lists going to impact defense preparedness. Rather, we would become much more prepared. The more you start, putting your own people onto getting some lists, we start working. And I think India needs somebody to always shake us up. Whenever I meet the Chinese, I thank them that you have really shaken us up and you have woken us up. I do not know whether the other panelists would agree. So therefore, these lists are very good in simple question to answer everything. Right, thank you.
Thank you so much, Major General. I would request Professor Singh, Professor Swaran Singh. Sir, there is a curious question. In this budget, Nirmala Sitharaman has mentioned about setting up of border villages as tourist destinations. Do you see something as something as part of a larger strategic objective, especially because infrastructure expansion features very aggressively in this budget? Is there something deeper which we can read through, and you could help us through in this?
Thank you, Simi. December of 2021, China had passed a law on land border modernization. And there are various reports that since then, or even before that, about 600 plus such villages have been identified by China on the frontier. And a lot of new construction, modern technologies, communication, road transport systems have been strengthened. And that is clearly as a result of a simple thing that China for a long period had a policy of 2 steps forward, 1 step backward with most of its neighbors, and South China Sea is perhaps the ideal example of how it has gradually captured enormous part of their territory using that strategy, except that this strategy has failed when it comes to its largest neighbor, India. India has stood up to China, especially in about last decade or so. Doklam and Galwan are great examples of standing up to China. An entire neighborhood is watching it, which has led to China to look long term as to how this largest neighbor has to be tackled. And therefore, it is a kind of a contestation now in tiring out each other. And that would require a lot of support from the frontier areas. And frontier areas, as you understand, are largely the minorities of China, whereas the People's Liberation Army is largely the Han Chinese armed forces, not just in terms of loyalty, but in terms of acclimatization also. It's not easy for Han Chinese to stay on those high altitude kind of regions. And therefore, over a period of time, the support of people's armed police and people of these frontier areas to be co-opted into those kind of missions and assignments is why that kind of enormous effort has been made from the Chinese side. So staying power is important, just like India is now staying in frontier areas. And that has obviously been responded by India as well, that in India also, despite all the limitations, General would vouch me that border areas, communities and people have been a backbone of armed forces in many ways. And General can expand on that. I wouldn't like to say, maybe many of you know in how many ways they are supporting Indian armed forces. So providing better life to them, equipping them and connecting them better to India's overall posturing of sort of strength of armed forces is what for a long time required this kind of not just simply road building and communications and other things, but improving lives of people on frontier areas. And I think it's a very timely, in that sense, response to that new strategy where China is now trying not to do the old-fashioned 2 steps forward, 1 step backward, but emphasize on its staying power. And India has to respond to that staying power. And I think this is part of that strategy that India has started focusing on communities on the frontier areas also. Thank you, Simi, for asking that question. If you allow me about 10 to 15 seconds, I think Satyam's question is very interesting. But a lot of people perhaps think that when we emphasize too much on Atmanirbhar Bharat, it means we are shutting doors on anyone else. As General said, this is not shutting doors on others. It's basically focusing on niche advantages, areas where India can contribute in defense production. Just like I was mentioning that a lot of what we buy from China can be produced locally. As you know, this is after Prime Minister's campaign for Atmanirbhar Bharat, that May last year, Prime Minister signed with Joe Biden something called India-US Initiative for Critical and Emerging Technologies. NSA Ajay Doval was, I think, only this week in Washington on the first meeting under this initiative on critical and emerging technologies between these 2 countries. General Electric is now going to produce engines for aircrafts, indigenous aircrafts in India. And despite half a century of licensed production with Russia, engines are the weakest link in India's defense production. I think General Electric is finally stepping into that. India's sort of semiconductor sector is being co-opted, and experts from India are going to be co-opted into American production of semiconductor chips. So there is interdependence that is not going to disappear, except that India wants to emphasize to identify niche areas where Indian defense production can happen only domestically. And also 5 seconds on Mr. Sachdev's point, I am happy he mentioned a peace bomb on Pakistan. That sentiment has to be repeatedly revised. And that's a good diplomatic posture. But of course, we have to understand that even in case of natural calamities, Pakistan is often reluctant to take Indian help when it happens even on areas where India is the immediate next door neighbor and can deliver, even compared to Pakistan. So Pakistan will continue to have that reluctance, but that doesn't stop us from making these gestures. And let us see how Pakistan responds. I remember Bajpayee had proposed no war pact. Nothing came out of it. But these are gestures that I think in diplomacy sometimes you make, and they have their own relevance, with, of course, understanding that they may not be responded. So I'm happy that he made that comment of the peace bomb. I like that expression. Thank you, Simi, and back to you.
Thank you, sir. Thank you very much for your response. I would move to Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya just after Mr. Rabinder Sachdev. Mr. Sachdev, there is a question, I think, if you could take this by Satyam, whether about opening up of the defense sector for private players. Is it like the US kind of a model that has commercialized war for profit business via the arms lobby? Could you respond to this?
Thank you. A couple of things. You see, I mean, the US model of defense evolved over a period of time after the Second World War. that was a very different era, right? The US government stepped in much. They put in money into the R&D, and they kind of, prompted and promoted several companies, private companies to come on, take on, and quite a bit of a venture investment approach. That was a very different era through which the US government, was able to create the so-called military industrial complex in the US. In the world of today, for us to create something like that, I think is pretty difficult. That's one. Secondly, harking back, yes, to the point that you see when the US defense industry produces, or even in the 60s, 70s and all, they had the wider world markets also, right? Not only within the US domestic, but the other world markets also. So if some of the products are not doing well or taking off within the US, maybe they could sell it to a Germany or XYZ, I don't know, whatever, right? That broadened the markets for the US in order to grow its military industrial complex. That's one. Now, secondly, that it has commercialized war for profit business. Well, India will not be in a position, realistically speaking, to create wars across the world like the US does, supposedly, right? Or to create situations which cause wars. India is not in that position, honestly. The US is in that position, and sure, when wars happen or are created, yes, definitely is the US defense industry benefits. By the way, right now in this Ukraine war, we think that the US defense industry is benefiting hugely. Yes, it will. But at present, right now, this past year records, there's a report in the Wall Street Journal just 2 days ago. Lockheed Martin's and the Raytheons, their profit numbers are not even as good. Some of them are in loss right now. Issue is they're facing supply chain constraints. They're facing labor issues. So there's a lot happening there. But yes, the US defense industry will make big gains in this coming next year. But this past year, their financial numbers are not as one would estimate or as one is thinking. So India cannot is not in a position to be, participating or encouraging or taking one side or the other in multiple wars across the country which happen. So India cannot adopt that model that we go in somewhere, we stoke some passions one way or the other, and the war breaks out, and then we sell our arms to one side or the other. We cannot. I don't think so. We can do something like that.
Thank you so much, sir. There's a question by Samriddhi, and Samriddhi, would you like to ask the question directly to Professor Singh? Yes, unmute yourself, please. Yeah, quickly.
Hello, sir. The question is slightly off topic, but it's about Kishida's decision, under his government. Japan has decided to increase its defense spending, and there are some major changes taking place in, Japan's front recently. So my question is, how is that going to affect India's security in the Indo-Pacific? And generally, the general relation between India and Japan, and Japan's world stand. Just a very general question. Sorry.
No, thank you, Smriti, for that question. I hope I can answer. Basically, Japan and India have almost for 2 decades now understood that China is their shared challenge. And that has really, over a period of time, brought them closer. And therefore, you would remember that Shinzo Abe's first speech on the confluence of 2 oceans happened in India's parliament, from where this whole idea of Indo-Pacific was to later expand and grow. And idea of Indo-Pacific, again, has brought not just Japan and India closer, but a whole range of other, what I call United States friends and allies. From Australia, Philippines, Singapore, and everybody else, right away to Saudi Arabia, to Canada, where I'm sitting, all focusing on Indo-Pacific, and all of them feeling China as their shared common challenge. That is creating atmospherics where the continuous effort of Japan and India to come closer to deal with their shared challenge gets reinforced and facilitated And that should help these two countries really come closer. And now your point that you mentioned, the two important reports that Kishida government had launched in December, the National Defense Report and National Security Report, are fundamentally saying that they are finally going to not just cross that traditional self-imposed limit of keeping defense budget under 1%, but actually take it to 2% by 2027 or so in 5 years. And they have actually in this year's budget earmarked $1.58 billion to buy Tomahawks from United States, which is going to be the first counter-strike weapon. You know, it's a national defense force that they have. Now they're going to be offensive in terms of their capabilities. So Japan taking on this kind of new role and willing to spend that kind of money is going to really make sure that the kind of complementarity or reciprocity or jointmanship that has been built over 2 decades between India and Japan is able to maximize how we can ensure our China challenge is addressed, redressed, or restrained. So in that sense, I think Japan is on the cusp of transforming itself as a normal nation, as they have been saying for almost last 15, 20 years. So once they actually happen to make themselves as a normal nation, have a normal defense force, given the size of their economy, $5+ billion, they should be able to spend a lot of money on defense as well. And I think that definitely the new avatar in that sense of Kishida government is going to strengthen the bilateral relationship, is going to perhaps also contribute to India's own redressal of its defense and foreign policy challenges. Hopefully, let us see. The G20 summit meeting, I think, is a historic opportunity here, where India wants to launch itself as a global leader. And a lot of that reset will happen in India's relations with many of these countries. And all of these leaders will be sort of really showcasing how they look at India and what they expect from India and how India wishes to engage them. And in that set of leaders, India-Japan, I think, has a really special equation built over last 20 years. Thank you, Smriti. I hope I answered your question. But of course, it's an ongoing discussion. Back to Simi again.
Thank you. Thank you, sir. Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, my question to you is about the way forward in moving towards a budget towards the defense and in the foreign policy aspects. Where do you see, definitely you have highlighted all the gaps, you've highlighted the numbers in your presentation. So according to you, where we could be moving in the next years, taking perhaps drawing lessons from the gaps that are there in the present, so that the overall objective is that this kind of a financial aid vacuum, you have highlighted so many countries where the contributions or aid to these countries have increased and also somewhere they have decreased. You highlighted Mauritius, Maldives in the Indian Ocean region, and also Bhutan because of strategic reasons, especially guided by China. So how can we ensure that this kind of financial aid vacuum, if we cannot leverage, is not filled up by China in the coming years? Ma'am, over to you.
Yes. Well, the problem with the financial, the budget, union budget every year, as I pointed out right in the beginning of my presentation, is that there is this issue of availability of funds. Okay, funds are limited. All right, taxes, non-tax revenue, and basically other means like disinvestment in the public sector. These kind of things which bring in the funds, which always is there. Now the problem is the demand is much more than the supply. So as a result, in fact, what you find is every time, expenditure trumps income. Okay, and so therefore the government is forced to borrow. Now, when you are forced to borrow, there is this debt to GDP, or debt as such ratio, And we find that since 2020, the debt to GDP ratio for India has been around 83%. Now, so far as the World Bank is concerned, World Bank has basically stated that anything that is over 77% can be problematic, all right, as such. What we see in Sri Lanka and in Pakistan is that the debt to GDP, all right, as such ratio has gone up much higher. And as a result, it's facing, well, certain kinds of crisis. Now, the problem is when the debt to GDP ratio is so high, well, which means basically well, in terms of rupees, we have a big budget, but in terms of dollars, we don't really have that kind of a big budget. So it's from these limited resources that we have to, well, prioritize, all right, what is important and what is not. Now, the country itself is very important, all right, what happens within the country, like for instance, the people of the country, the citizenry, as I said, people's first budget, all right, especially in the context of 2024 being an election year. So you're saying that how do we see the way forward, all right, the future? The future is 24, 25, and 24 is an election year, all right? So how do you expect that basically countries, the gaps which are there, basically in some critical areas like Bhutan and Maldives, the allocation has increased, but then in other, it has decreased. Now, how do you expect that there will be increase in these, all right, as such, in an election year, when actually the people, all right, of the country, well, and the various sevas that are being kind of promoted by the government, these are more important for getting votes, all right? So money allocated to ministries which deal with poverty alleviation, with, agriculture, with basically all these kind of things, well, mitigation of the needs of the people, I mean, the demands of the people, all right? These are much more important, all right, in an election year than, all right, foreign and defense policy, unless, of course, there's a war, okay? So in that context, the way I see it for the next year, I mean, immediate future, all right, I don't see that there will be much more allocation, all right, as such for, and as I think Swaran pointed out, I mean, it was Swaran or was it Major General Chakravorty who pointed out that basically what was actually allocated last year was not actually spent, okay? The estimated amount, the estimated budget, all right, well, it did not meet, okay, that which is already allocated. So therefore, this is not going to be a foreign policy, or the MEA is not going to be a priority in the coming year, all right, as such. Later on, of course, when we go forward, further forward, all right, that is, as I said, but then of course the Modi government has to remain in power, all right, because if there is a change in government, all right, priorities will again change, all right. Now, in fact, it's Atmanirbhar Bharat, Clean Bharat, Swachh Bharat, all these kind of things, all these kind of Bharats. But another government, all right, can have, a very different agenda. And of course, then, okay, the priorities will be different. How do I see the way forward? Well, basically, it depends, all right, as to who wins the next elections. But in the next year, at least, foreign policy is not going to be that much of a priority.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Sir, ma'am, Professor Major General Chakravorty, ma'am just mentioned about the lapsable budget. So very quickly, if you could respond to my query on, there was a demand from the forces that they would want an unlapsable budget. So the unutilized part of the previous years could go on to the next year, but that has not really, received the attention which was needed. So what are your views quickly, if you could respond?
See, we are a democratic country. So if today, let's say, even I have to receive my pension, I'm just saying, it has to be approved. It has to be approved by what are known as a number of authorities who are today in very, very simplistic term known as audit authorities. Now, if you take the Army, Navy, Air Force, we have got the Ministry of Defense Finance, and we have got also the Ministry of Finance. Look at it. I mean, it looks very simple that I want to buy a particular weapon. When I want to buy a weapon, that weapon firstly has to be approved within the armed forces. Then it has to be what you call, a complete procedure, which would be much more than the Ramayana and Mahabharata combined, has to be followed. Since I've been getting all these weapons, after that, it has to be approved at the level at which normally is the CCS. Now, CCS is known to all of you, the Cabinet Committee on Security. After that, the entire process has to be negotiated, drawn out, and then after that, the expenditure has to be passed by Ministry of Defense Finance and also by the Ministry of Finance. Means though you have budgeted it, ultimately when you're going to spend the money, these two organizations have to pass it. Let's say that they have budgeted that this much will be spent on foreign travel. But if today an individual from, say, the Navy wants to go, or a ship wants to go abroad, it has to be again passed by the appropriate authority. So when we say that a part of the lapsed budget must be what you call available, is certain amount which we have actually proposed to people to spend, but they have not yet approved. So what can we do? We cannot force the what you call Ministry of Defense Finance or the Ministry of Finance that you approve it. We keep going to them, and they take they say the whole thing is under, there's a beautiful word in all democracies, it is under processing. I mean to say, you can go to a bank also and say, has this been credited? Sir, it is under processing. So now if it is under processing, at least whatever has lapsed should be available in the next budget. Very logical. And that's what I would say, this is common everywhere in all countries of the world. I mean, since I keep meeting everybody, yes, it may not be in authoritarian countries like Pakistan, China, where, the military has a greater say. But here we are dependent on every check, every amount has to be passed and then again investigated by an auditor. That is it right? Is it wrong? Is it this? Then only a Rafale can come in that. So the procedures involved is that humongous. You can't imagine. I mean, it will require about 10 discussions like these to understand what is the defense procurement procedure, what is the defense procedure, this thing. Believe me, it is equivalent to doing 6 PhDs. I'll just leave it as simple as that.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, sir. Thank you so much to Major General K Chakravorty, Professor Swaran Singh, Mr. Rabinder Sachdev, and Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya. It has really been a very stimulating discussion today. And of course, it doesn't end and we can keep discussing about it from the time the budget is really implemented from 1st of April. So thank you so much. And I hand it over to Fiza for the formal vote of thanks.
This meeting is being recorded.
Thank you, ma'am. So as we have come to the end of today's discussion, I, Fiza Mahajan, researcher at IMPRI, Impact and Policy Research Institute, would like to propose the formal vote of thanks on behalf of IMPRI, Center for International Relations and Strategic Studies, for today's deliberation, a panel discussion on defense, foreign policy, and Union Budget 2023-24. We are grateful to our moderator, Dr. Simi Mehta, and panelists, Professor Sanjukta Bhattacharya, Major General Dr. K Chakravorty, Professor Swaran Singh, and Mr. Rabinder Sachdev, for taking part in this discussion and enlightening us. We thank all of our participants who have raised pertinent questions and actively participated in today's deliberation. You may also find more discussions on international relations and foreign policy in our IMPRI Web Policy Talk series, The State of International Affairs, #Diplomacy Dialogue, and other thematic series. We are grateful if you are watching us later on our YouTube channel or listening to us on our various podcasts or reading our publications. We hope you continue to join in future to IMPRI Web Policy Talk series. We also invite you to see IMPRI's 3rd annual series of thematic deliberations and analysis of Union Budget available on IMPRI's YouTube channel, Financial Year 2023-24, that were being organized from February 2nd to 7th, 2023. Wishing you all a very good evening. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Professor
Thank you
Singh,
very
for
much.
joining us so early.
Thank you, Simi.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.